The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Just a second here, we're going to get started. I know there's a few people that are connecting to the session at the last minute, so we're just going to give one more minute and get started. Excellent. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you for choosing to attend this presentation this morning. We are going to be talking about just basics, a primer on auditing Oracle E-Business Suite for particularly geared towards internal auditors. Just a couple logistics on the front end. Up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see this webinar control panel. The little box toggles the windowed and full screen mode. Certainly, please provide or ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat dialog or that questions box you'll see below there. I will be answering as many questions towards the end of the presentation as possible. And during the presentation, we'll be conducting a number of polls. Please take time to respond to those polls, and 3 out of the 4 polls are required to get CPE certificate if you're requesting that at the end. So the agenda today, really this is an introduction to the overall concept of auditing Oracle E-Business Suite. So I'm going to do a little bit of introduction to myself, talk about application security, what I call IT security, which is below the application level, SQL forms and utilities, diagnostics, internal controls and security deficiencies, sensitive data in non-production environments, application controls, change management, a wrap-up, and Q&A. The topics I've chosen, this isn't kind of a top-down approach to how to audit Oracle E-Business Suite as much as it is trying to give you a feel for, as internal auditors, what some of the more significant concerns are that I've seen organizations still struggling with. So certainly this isn't kind of a comprehensive audit plan type of a strategy, but this is kind of a primer on those things perhaps you need to go look at when you're doing your audits, focusing on some of the areas of higher risk. So a little bit about myself. I'm a CPA by trade, came out, did some auditing in a Big Four audit firm back in the early 90s. Have earned my CISA and CIA designation in the last few years. Founder of ERP Seminars, which is just being rebranded into ERP Risk Advisors. We sponsor the Oracle Users Best Practices Board. Have been written and published a lot. OEG's Insight Magazine, ISACA's Control Journal a couple times, the ACFE Fraud Magazine. Kind of have a unique background in that my experience covers both the auditor side from a Big Four audit perspective. The auditee side, I served 6 years in corporate CFO and controller roles and ran the audits during most of those years, so I understand the concept of a financial statement audit in particular. This is prior to the SOX age. Have been implemented the E-Business Suite as a client back starting in 1998 and did a rollout, moved over as a financial systems manager and rolled out the applications to a couple countries, so I understand kind of both the pre and the post implementation process. Written my first solo book project, the Oracle E-Business Suite Controls, Application Security Best Practices, which came out last year, and was a contributing author to another book that came out and was published last year as well. So application security design, I'm going to lead off with this because this is an area probably that I've seen organizations struggle with the most. And the primary struggle has not really been taking a risk-based approach. And I'm actually, I think, going to do another webinar just on how I've seen organizations implement application security, in particular how they're focusing on segregation of duty risks and single function risks, or in some cases not focusing on that well or enough. But that's really an art, and that's been evolving over the last few years, is identifying risk, specific risk to the application or access within the application, and designing security related to that. This concept of principle of least privilege is something that auditors should be well aware of. That says essentially that you should be giving access to users to the least amount of privilege, or the least amount of access they need to do their jobs. And a lot of times security is designed from a little bit more of a broad privilege perspective, giving them access to a high-level menu, and then excluding off certain functions and menus that are not appropriate. Well, oftentimes what that leaves is what I call excess access. Users end up having things like value set maintenance, perhaps where it's not appropriate, or user profile values, or it could be just some other functionally related things. So the goal really be in security design is to design the specific role with the specific functions and or forms, if you look at it in that context, that are necessary in order to do their job. That also includes the use of standard request groups. That also includes making sure that the access they need through concurrent programs, whether those are update programs, interfaces, or reports, are appropriate. And I've definitely seen cases where there are some high-risk reports that end up on users' desktops. They're able to run because they didn't know they were high-risk reports, giving them access to sensitive data. The other comment I'll make here on standard menus and responsibilities is this concept of upgrade risk. I think a valid discussion needs to happen when you're implementing application security of what is the appropriate way to build custom roles or responsibilities. Do you use standard menus, or and standard submenus associated with those, or do you use completely custom menus and submenus? And the concept of upgrade risk really kind of refers to the fact that as Oracle, as patches are applied to your environment, Oracle inserts new features and functions into those seeded menus, and those often end up on users' desktops at some point. The ability to do the impact analysis of those menus and submenus below that, there's really no built-in feature in the application that allows an organization to effectively do that. So it is either a very manual and arduous process during patching, and this could be as simple as a one-off patch, or it could be a family pack, or it could be a major upgrade going from like 11i to R12. Those new functions and menus get added to users, oftentimes without being fully evaluating the risk. So that discussion needs to happen internally of how you're going to address that risk going forward, and I think oftentimes organizations haven't properly addressed that risk. The next to last bullet point, review and understand security design process are roles well understood by the approvers. Is single function risk as important of a concept as SOD risk? So the people that are approving during the user provisioning process, do they really understand the access that's being granted? And more importantly, do they understand the risks related to that access? So the training and ongoing training process and education process of making sure that approvers understand those roles and risks, especially as new risks perhaps are identified that weren't previously disclosed to them, that is a really critical process. Single function risk and how those risks tie into processes outside the system is another area I think companies have struggled with. Again, I think I'm going to do a more detailed dive on this, kind of showing some good ways to handle risk assessment process and bad ways, or maybe less than perfect ways to do those in an upcoming webinar. But I have done a webinar called Risk-Based Assessment of User Access Controls and Segregation of Duties. That webinar is available at the webinar access forum, which has all of our recorded webinars. I just wanted to highlight a couple of other assessment services that may be of interest to you guys. One is a software as a service offering on Oracle e-Business Suite, segregation of duties, sensitive function access, and sensitive data analysis. Looking at it from at the function level through a software as a service model. Privileged user, there's a privileged user review that I do a level 2 assessment, as well as a user provisioning process review. All these are kind of very targeted assessments if you're interested in any of them. So we're going to go to poll. I did tell you there's several polls throughout this presentation, and our first poll is, I'm going to launch here in a second. Just give me 1 second. It seems to be a little bit slow in responding. So the first poll is how confident, oops, let's see here. I think it's user error. There we go. How confident are you that your organization has fully addressed the risks related to application security? So certain would be, if you've got a very extremely comprehensive risk assessment process and you're looking at both IT risk, application security risk, and really doing that analysis of risk holistically, looking at what's happening at the business process as a whole, and not just looking at what's happening in the application. And I always talk about one of my favorite examples is, often organizations focus on the risks related to supplier master maintenance, and another risk maybe enter POs or enter invoices, and they're not necessarily focusing on what's happening outside the system that allows or causes a user, a supplier that can be set up. So I always call that the supplier approval and validation process. And that risk is, that somebody can request a supplier be set up within the system, and the request process doesn't have proper approvals or doesn't have any approval process related to it. And if the request that it poses the greatest amount of risk, so if a purchasing agent, for example, can request that a supplier be set up, then and there's no kind of checks and controls or balances related to that, that can effectively establish a supplier in the system. So from a segregation of duties perspective, they really do have the ability to establish or effectively establish a supplier and enter a PO. So that's one example of risks, addressing those holistically in the entire business process. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. It looks like about 25% say they're highly confident. About 50% say not at all confident, 8% say certain, and about 17% don't know. So just last second for votes. I see a couple of you voting at the last second, so please register your vote so you can get CP certificate. So I'm going to close this poll. We're going to go back to the slides, kind of move on to the next topic, which is IT security. And this is an area I'm dangerous in my knowledge of, because I'm not necessarily a hardcore, what I call a hardcore IT security guy. But I'm going to point you to a couple things that you guys should be looking at. The first thing are some guidelines that Oracle's put together. They've pieced together from various sources in the public domain. So the two MetaLink notes you want to look at are the 11i version of this is 189.367.1. The R12 version is 403.537.1. The one thing I would caution you on placing too much guidance or too much confidence in these is that they don't appear to be maintained on a regular basis. For example, the R12 version was rolled out about 1.5 years ago or so, and I've run across some generic users that are not documented within this document. And generally, that's the same thing I found in the 11i version. Was this just wasn't a focus of maintaining the various best practices or guidelines in this document by Oracle. So to the extent that you are participating in either the internal controls repository or the internal controls and security list server, I do send out updates on these, and I'm maintaining for end users. I'm maintaining a list of certain things that are of risk within the internal controls repository. So I really would like to urge you guys, as you guys see other risks or updates to this that you've identified, perhaps, to let me know, and I'll make sure that gets disseminated out to the rest of the people in the groups. There are some good primers from Integrity and Solution Beacon. You can just hit both of their websites, integrity.com, solutionbeacon.com. Both of them look at hardening requirements, various different recommendations on password controls. I do talk a lot about those in my in various webinars and seminars that I do, but if you want to just go look at some of the recommendations, there's some good information out there. I would also suggest following P. Finnegan's website. I don't have that listed here. So the point really here, you should be hardening your applications, your database layer, your OS, your application server, following the guidelines in these documents, and re-hardening and reviewing hardening after patches are applied. And the reason that's important is oftentimes patches will, for example, reset passwords, either application user passwords like sysadmin perhaps, or more often they reset database passwords, schema passwords, back to whatever their standard password is. So like AP maybe, the AP schema password may be set at AP. So you need to re-harden those after patches. I really would, depending upon who you have and the level of skill set, if you're implementing applications, I really would recommend hiring a reputable EBS specialized firm prior to go live to review what your implementers have done. You may find some very highly skilled people in your system integrator, and or you may not necessarily have the right skill set to be able to follow some of these guidelines. So I think I've got, let's see, next slide here is going to be quickly a poll 2. So we're going to launch this out here. And this is really focusing on analyzing, reviewing those best practice documents. So again, you should be really reviewing and following all the recommendations in those. There is a significant number of hardening exercises from generic users to server security to how to handle database seeded database users. And there is a significant number of risks. There actually is a lot of the risks were originally identified by Integrity, and then incorporated into those documents. You'll see a reference to the copyright of Integrity in those documents. So they're a very reputable firm in this area. So I don't necessarily always see a document put in detail on during the implementation process on identifying and evaluating those risks. So if you're auditing the applications, certainly what I would do is go to IT management and say, have you guys evaluated the risks associated with these documents, and have them show where they've addressed the risks, not only on a one-time basis, but how they're addressing those risks on an ongoing basis. So I'm just going to give us another few seconds here. It looks like there's a few people that need to vote. So if you can vote on this, I'm going to close the poll here in a second, and we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. So it looks like about a quarter, 23% or so, say highly confident. 2% say certain, which is a little scary. 43% say not at all confident, and 30% say don't know, which could be just an indication that you haven't asked that question. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and we'll get back to the slides here in a second. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is SQL Forms, Utilities Diagnostics Access, and both of those kind of provide backdoor access to the applications. SQL Forms are nothing more than forms that allow embedded SQL statements to be executed within them. So that would allow a user that has access to a form in the application to do a SQL statement, a DML statement like insert, update, delete, or a DDL statement, things like drop, truncate, alter, create. And in some cases, you can also embed and execute operating system scripts through this. And if you think about the way the application is architected, the application layer, as it connects to the database, is connecting through the most powerful, essentially full rights to everything that happens at the application. So these forms, as the way they're built, allow connectivity to execute privileges at the database level or at the operating system level without any external controls related to them. So this could lead obviously to fraud, data theft, resetting passwords, circumvention of policy, internal controls deficiencies, anything in essence you could be doing through an ad hoc SQL statement can be done through these, and there's obviously a lot of risks related to that. Instability of the application would be another significant one. So forms that accept SQL statements, what are some recommendations related to that? The first thing you should do obviously is tightly control who has access to those. And that would be essentially some type of query at the function level to identify what users have access to those. There really isn't a easy way to handle that. If you wanted to just say, give me who's using a function for alerts, for example. There's not one report you can go and pull that says, show me all users that have access to the alerts form. And a lot of that relates to how the nested nature of how the menus are built. So a menu can be built with several layers or several submenus. It can go down an infinite number of, there is no limit in the system to how many layers it can go down. I've seen layers go down up to 9 different submenus. And so that's the challenge really from a programmatic perspective, is to identify those. So certainly I can help you. I've got a SaaS service that we offer through this, and there's other ways to try to get at this information as well. But if you really want to have a comprehensive analysis looking at SQL forms as a single function risk, you should look into either an SOD tool implementing it in detective mode or a SaaS service. So all the activity, because of the risk related to this, all the activity of these forms should go through your change management process. You specifically should have procedures and training and education related to that, anybody that has access to these. And typically you would restrict these to IT, business analysts or IT developers. The code going through these forms should be subject to a peer review process, just like you would any ad hoc SQL statement. All activities within these forms should be audited using a trigger or a log-based solution. So you have an audit trail from the system level, and there is no audit trail built out of the box that gives you all the activity through these forms. And then I would, from an auditing perspective, all activities should be reconciled back to prove activity. It should be 100% sample size. You shouldn't take the risk of any of a smaller sample size. And then for unauthorized changes, appropriate actions must be taken to plug the holes, and that could be a variety of different actions that need to be taken. So I did do a full webinar on this. Again, this webinar access form that has a bunch of recorded webinars we've done, that is available. It's free to go back and look at the risks related in more detail. So poll 3, this is always an interesting poll, represents my organization's maturity related to SQL forms. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll again. And this is multiple selections may apply. You can look at multiple or record multiple responses. The first one was all SQL forms activity goes through the change management process. That would be a minimum defining that activity goes through the change management process. A trigger or log-based audit trail is created for all SQL forms activity. We regularly reconcile system activity to the actual activity. And then the last one would be none of the above, perhaps. So give you guys a second to respond to that. I'm just looking through some of the questions here as they're coming in, and there's good questions being asked here. So again, I'm just going to close this in a second. That's good. Looks like over 40% of people saying that SQL forms activity goes through the change management process. Still only about less than 30% have a trigger or log-based audit trail to monitor this activity. Less than 17% of respondents say that they regularly reconcile the system activity back to the approvals. That's pretty par for the course. I'd say that more organizations are starting to identify this as a risk and putting proper controls in place. Auditors are certainly become more aware, both internal and external auditors, of these risks. And there's certainly the tools in this place, the trigger and log-based solutions, and there's a lot of them out there in the marketplace that can accomplish this, are much more mature in their review and monitoring of activity through things like SQL forms. I'm going to close that poll. We're going to get back into the slides here. So internal controls and security deficiencies is the next topic. You know, I've kind of tried to track some of the more difficult challenges that are kind of pre-built within the application. Things like the customer form, the fact that it's a massive form with a lot of different features and functionalities that often multiple constituencies within the organization need access to. You know, you may need access for credit to maintain the credit limits and payment terms, and your sales and marketing organization may need access to pricing, defaults, tolerances, and various things related to shipping. You may have a master data maintenance group that manages this, but that's one example. Those master data forms, or this customer form, supplier form, item master, all of those don't allow kind of the sufficient level of security to be able to parse those out appropriately for various groups. Workflow history retention is another big one. Oftentimes workflow history, the approvals and notifications go out, and those are being purged on a regular basis because of the volume of activity related to those. And perhaps from an auditing perspective, if not external, perhaps certainly your internal audit process, you may want to pull the approval process and sample some of those to validate the application or automated controls. And that workflow history, most organizations will purge that no more than 30 days. Sometimes external auditors even requiring you know, a documentation of who approved POs and tracing that back to, for example, PO approval limits approved by your board. And that workflow retention history is critical to be able to demonstrate some of those automated controls. So that history usually gets purged, and you have to put a custom archive process in place. There is no out-of-the-box archive process that gives you just the approvals, or just the approvals for certain workflows. So that's a big thing, and I've got a write-up on that in the internal controls repository. You can contact me for more information if you need help with that. Lack of audit trail, the before and after value. Again, I think I've got some slides coming up on this, but that's a major deficiency in the way the application is architected. There are some function deficiencies, and you know, customers and suppliers masters, supply masters are examples of that. But for example, the approval of adjustments in AR, the way that the form is and the function is designed, it allows a user to do multiple adjustments or write-offs to an invoice or transaction, as long as that each subsequent or each adjustment is within their approval limit. Well, you normally have an approval limit to restrict a user from to approving or adjusting off a certain dollar amount. And in this case, let's say you have a transaction for $1,000 that needs to be written off, and a user has an approval limit of $250. To circumvent the system controls, all they have to do is 4 individual adjustments to that transaction at $250 each. And that would circumvent the system controls and more than likely circumvent your policies as well. Global shared settings is another thing, how you're handling those, things like value set, values, line types, profile classes. These are shared throughout the application. Profile options, locations, customer header, suppliers. I've got a whole list of things that I consider some of the more challenges in how the application was designed, and suggested ways to handle those. Some of the responses may be you know, personalizations, custom PLL, or the use of putting some monitoring in place via trigger or log-based monitoring tool. And again, there's a list of some of those things I've documented in the internal controls repository. Sensitive data, non-production environments, data sensitivity or sensitive data in general is an issue you need to handle, but often what I see is security is much more loose or lax in a non-production environment, and that often leaves sensitive data more accessible to developers, for example, or analysts that might not have full access to that in a production environment. So the point really being there is you want to put a security policy in place that identifies how you should be addressing application security and database security, not only in your production environment but your non-production environments. And you may want to use post-clone steps to manipulate data or secure the data in your non-production environments to address those risks. There are a couple good tools in the marketplace to address that. I'm actually doing a full webinar on best practices for protecting sensitive data in an EBS environment. I'm addressing both the production and non-production risks in a week from, I guess that's a week from tomorrow. So there's the register link if you're interested. And before you ask, I will send out copies of these slides. So you'll have an opportunity to see the links, and most of the links are available on our homepage, erpseminars.com or erpra.net for ERP Risk Advisors. Application controls. So a lot of companies have automated controls and tried to reduce auditing, both internal and external auditing scope by embedding as many application controls as possible. Again, I've got a full webinar on this, but the overview of what you should be doing is knowing your policies and procedures well, what application controls are being relied upon, know your process, make sure all system-related setups are documented and baselined. And the example I use on this to kind of demonstrate some of the risk is matching within the purchasing with the PO process, the 2-, 3-, 4-way match. A lot of companies, in theory, would like to have a 3-way match, which in essence means that a receipt has to be done against a PO in order for that invoice to be approved. It's a good control. But the way the system is set up, it allows for lines to be generated and overridden. Even if you have all your line types set up to require a 3-way match, you can override that at the shipment level when you're actually issuing a PO. And so it's important to understand the system implication of what you're trying to put in place. And certainly from a controls design perspective, if you know that, as an example, somebody can override the controls when we're doing the transaction level, you either need to automate that through a personalization on that form, or you need to put some monitoring in place to make sure that they are not overriding that, or where they override that according to policy, it would be appropriate. So any application control changes, the system setups related to those. So like I mentioned, document types and line types and at the PO level are two things that drive approvals and matching requirements for purchase orders. Those changes should go through your change management process, should be documented and approved like anything else. So you should have specifically a configuration change management procedure that identifies the forms that are required to go through change management. Obviously, not all forms have risks, or form-based configurations that have risks. You want to focus on the ones that have the risk, both from a key control perspective and other risks identified. And those should all go through your change management process. So that's part of how you should be defining your change management policies and procedures, very granular, very specific to what the risks are. The ability to change those setups and related objects should be tightly controlled. This is you control all object changes. Changes to setups and objects related to application control should be audited, which would require the use of a detailed log or trigger-based audit trail to be built, and you'd want to put a change management audit process in place as well. So next steps on this one, there is an auditing application controls webinar, another good free webinar I did a few months back that you can access and review offline. I also have a e-business suite SOX key controls best practices assessment, which may be appropriate here. Another level 2 assessment you may want to consider taking advantage of. Change management. Just got somebody saying my voice is gone. Maybe the audio is coming in and out a little bit. If you guys are, if you're not hearing me, I guess you probably can't ping me. But if my voice comes and goes, please please tell me that. And maybe just a problem. Okay, good. No problem. It's okay now. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, occasionally the audio kind of comes and goes. Not often, but the quality of the audio is pretty good. Thanks. I guess the audio sounds good. I appreciate that feedback. So change management, next topic. I've got some of the more common change management issues. This isn't necessarily a comprehensive look at everything, but I think I've touched base on a couple of these things, and I've got some more common change management challenges that organizations are facing. So the first thing is failure to take into account request group access and the design of security. So when you have, you're defining your policies and procedures for change management, you should be very specific in how you expect how the expectations are made for changes to security. The initial design of request groups poses an access problem. I think I've talked about that earlier, but you should also have not only request groups, but all components of application security and database security should be specifically spelled out in your procedure documents, what levels of approvals need to happen. For example, you may want to have, from a sensitive data perspective, not only the process owner sign off on access to those, but you may also have a chief security officer or a security group that needs to sign off on those procedures that would allow access either through the application or through the database. Forms-based setups not being considered. I think I've talked through that. There are multiple risks related to forms-based configuration setups, not just key controls, but there's operational risks as well you need to take into consideration. Changes being made in various forms about SQL statements should be going through change management. We've talked through that. Excessive access to forms requiring change management. So once you kind of identify those things that should go through change management, you need to whittle down that list of who has access to that. And because of the way a lot of the submenus are built, allowing like the key flex field or flex field submenus, oftentimes people end up with excess access to DFS, key flex fields, value set values, cross-validation rules, security rules are some examples. User profile values would be another huge one that I see that generally speaking I don't like anyone to have access to the user profile values form. Failure to clearly document who is responsible for implementing the change. So you should be clearly identifying the group or individuals that are appropriate change implementers through those forms-based changes. That's usually fairly intuitive and fairly locked down. If you're talking about object changes, that goes through some type of tool like Quintana, or the DBAs are migrating and running those load scripts. But when you get into forms-based changes, it's not as clearly defined who's appropriate to make those changes. Usually it's a business analyst working within IT, but that group or people, persons, or should be identified. Failure to test for unauthorized changes, not just access like through the SQL forms, but essentially you should have a change management audit process that identifies what management should be doing to monitor to make sure that the change management process is effective. And you may have varying different audit sample sizes for that, but some would require, in my opinion, 100% sample size or a complete audit, and some you can based upon the risk, take a lower sample size. Failure to remediate changes that issues that cause for unauthorized changes. So in essence, you have to be auditing that change management audit, doing root cause analysis, and making appropriate changes. Documentation. I think if you have been auditing any systems, this is definitely a bone of contention for a lot of people. Is the documents like the BR100, which would be the application setup documents, or BR110s. The application security setup documents are not often kept current. So in terms of comparing the application, the existing application, to the approved baseline, if you will, those documentation is not those documents aren't often maintained, and that includes the typical IT documentation, user documentation, process documentation, internal controls documentation. All those things, you should have a checklist that go in place before those get migrated into production. To think about this in the context of forms-based changes as well. Perhaps you've got the object changes nailed down, but the forms-based changes need to have that same level of granularity. Poor impact analysis leading to a poor testing process. We talk a lot about this, the patching process. I've alluded to a little bit of that impact analysis when we're talking about security changes. And those, that's probably one of the biggest areas of risk that I see is when patches happen, assessing the impact of those patches on menus and role design. So that I can't really cover this topic in a lot of detail. And a lot of people, the README files are insufficient in a lot of cases, and trying to address the impact of a particular object change, not only on the standard functionality, but the customization is a challenge for a lot of organizations. I'll just kind of leave that one as it is. It's a big issue for organizations to struggle with. So next steps on this perhaps is there's a level 2 assessment I have, or we present that I can do a change management process review, looking at your procedures, policies and procedures, working with you on who has access and how that is appropriate. This isn't necessarily a long engagement, but can help solidify your change management process. That's such a critical general computing control, or ITGC, that so much of your application controls and the rest of your application relies upon. So wrapping up here, I got one more poll to take, so don't bolt off here during wrap up. The link again for all the recorded webinars, there's a few of them on there, is there. There's one upcoming paid webinar you may be interested in, actually coming up in a couple of days, auditing application security. I believe it's a 4-hour webinar, 4 hours of CPE for $199. That will start at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock my time. Mountain Time, and another assessment that I wanted to mention is this level 1 assessment that we can offer that just gives you a 5,000 or a 10,000 foot view of compliance with different best practices that I write about in my application security book. It's primarily focused on application security, but it hits a lot of other topics that may be of interest to kind of give you an introductory assessment to where the areas perhaps are of greater risk in your applications. A lot of other services that we offer, I think you guys have seen them, emails of the rebranding from ERP seminars to ERP Risk Advisory, and that has been because we have been delivering a lot of consulting services over the last few years, anywhere from RFP, RFI management, third-party software implementation, or user access control, SOD. I've implemented a lot of different types, and people on within our group have implemented a lot of different SOD offerings. So you name the GRC software, we probably have implemented it. I always say if we're not the expert in an area, either we'll tell you so, or we'll refer you to somebody that has an expertise in an area that may be more skilled than we are. Security and insurance controls, design and implementation for pre- and post-implementation work. Certainly getting involved in projects, pre- and post-implementation. Designing controls and security would be an area we've done a lot of work in the last few years. And I've mentioned a few of those level 1, level 2 assessment services that are prepackaged and fairly easy to understand, which are based upon a lot of the risks we've talked about today. Those are available. I'm going to go to Q&A here in a second, and I'm going to launch this next poll. Give me a second here. And this will be our last poll. So if you're, again, expecting CPE, this is a very simple poll. It is simply, if you'd like any follow-up regarding this webinar, I do offer a free 1-hour conference call to discuss anything that we've talked about today. If you've requested a CPE certificate, if you can just, when you sign up for the webinar, if you can just revalidate that or just put that on this as well, that would be helpful. Copies of the slides will go out as a follow-up to everybody that's participating. in today's webinar, and I'm going to get to some of the Q&A. So give me a second here to open the Q&A box. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Okay, how do you manage the risk posed by guest access to the system and to data granted that this is used by Oracle apps to meet some of its features like password reset? Well, the guest login cannot be, you cannot log in as the guest access through the application. So I really don't see a lot of risk through the application layer. Again, I would refer you to the webinar I have on monitoring generic users. There's a lot of information in there. Generally speaking, you just should not assign any responsibilities to guest. You shouldn't allow update scripts to be marking as guest if there's any update scripts that you're running, whether those are Oracle scripts or ad hoc scripts. But I've got a full 1-hour webinar that's in the recorded webinar link on use and care, I call use and care of generic logins. Join late, where do I find the Oracle Best Practices document? That is a MetaLink document. You can either ask users, whoever has access to MetaLink, to grant you access to that, or if you don't have access to that, I can email it to you. I don't see a lot of other questions at this point. If you have any questions, please pop in here. And how difficult is it to turn on Audit Trail within Oracle? That's a great question. Enabling the Audit Trail functionality through the system administrator responsibility is not difficult. The reporting of that is significant, and generally speaking, I go into more details on the pros and cons of this. There's a full webinar on building an audit trail, another recorded webinar that I have that I would refer to you, Joseph. There are some pros and cons to this. Generally speaking, when you get into a high volume of tables that need to be audited, the cost of enabling and building and maintaining the audit trail through the system administrator audit trail is, I think, cost prohibitive. And there are other products in the marketplace, trigger log-based solution. There's several of them that I would recommend that I think that make a better choice for building and enabling those. There's a lot of features like the metadata mapping, the preceded metadata mapping that happens to cross tables and build a discernible audit trail. The fine-grain auditing, if you want to be more granular about what you're auditing or who you're auditing, or a specific, essentially any where clause you want to add to a SQL statement that can be added in there. So if you're looking at a significant number of tables to monitor, and generally if you're doing a comprehensive risk assessment process, even for a small company, when you're looking at access to SQL forms, or activity through SQL forms, security-related objects, development-related objects, fraud-related objects, key control configurations, all those things really you should have an audit trail on. I would say that at a very minimum, you're talking 50 to 60 different tables for a very small environment. And when you have a large footprint, you're talking well over 100 tables that need to be audited, and just the sysadmin audit trail is not really, to me, a viable solution. Any thoughts on TCG? TCG, Transaction Controls Governor, is one of the components of the Oracle GRC Control Suite. I'm going to take that off the line a little bit. It can be used, I think, any transaction monitoring or controls monitoring tool. You need to understand the pros and cons of the value of that technology, and I go through more details in the Building an Audit Trail webinar. TCG tool, TCG is nothing more than a tool that monitors activity at the row who information. So that's the standard transaction monitoring. That has some value, and there's some cases where you want to use a tool like that. Most organizations have other report building tools that they're using, whether that's OBIEE, Discover, or some other third-party product they're building those ad hoc queries for. TCG is an option there. But you also, I would say, if you're looking at some type of continuous controls monitoring project, you also need to understand that the availability of the information you want to audit oftentimes requires a trigger or a log-based solution. So just my point on that, I would really encourage you to go look at the full building audit trail recorded webinar. It's free. You can download and look at that at any given point. What are your thoughts of the Oracle ERP with the add-on which would monitor Oracle user access? Again, I guess you're talking about Oracle's products, the Oracle GRC controls. Yeah, it's a good product. There's a lot of pros and cons to the products in the marketplace. I mean, it's a product that can be used very effectively. It's a little more challenging to implement than some other products in the marketplace, but it can do the job well. I would say any user access monitoring tool you put in place, or what people typically think of as an SOD monitoring tool, the challenge really is building good rules and using a risk-based approach. And I have seen a lot of botched implementations or ineffective implementations because they haven't done a good job at assessing risk in the front end and defining rules appropriately. I'm working with one customer right now where I'm reevaluating the rules on what was implemented, and I've seen large firms, not going to name names, but I've seen them come in with a rule set that's just are not targeted. And what I really would recommend is working with us on the risk assessment process on the front end. We've got without a doubt, the most comprehensive and thorough methodology and content to support a risk assessment, and you can use that risk assessment in any tool, whether it's Oracle GRC, whether it's ACL, next coming question, or any other product on the marketplace that does SOD monitoring. Next topic, have you used third-party generic tools to assist in auditing Oracle security? Example, ACL, if so, with what success? Any tool can be used to audit Oracle security depending upon what you're trying to do. And again, I'm going to refer you to the Building Audit Trail webinar. ACL is an external tool. It can only do so much because it's external to the application. Unless you have a trigger or log-based audit trail that builds the before and after values, if you're just looking at what's happening at the database as of that point in time, you're missing part of your audit requirements. A perfect example is SQL Forms. Somebody can embed an alert and define an alert, and then they can change the way the alert is written. In some cases, in the SQL Forms, like collection plans within the quality module, you can actually delete the data from the data. So that ad hoc query can be run, executed, and then the evidence that ever was ever executed is deleted from the database. And unless you have a trigger or log-based solution that records that detail, you're missing some significant risk within your application. So the point really be on the risk assessment process in the front end is understanding the technologies, the various tools that are available in the marketplace, what risks need to be or can be addressed using the various different technologies, and then establishing a monitoring process or program that uses the technologies appropriately and addresses the risks holistically. And we've spent a lot of time developing the methodology and the content, and I guarantee there's nobody as better content or methodology in the marketplace. There's some firms that are pretty good that I would recommend as well, but like I said, if you either implement a trigger or log-based monitoring solution or a user access control solution, or you're implementing a CCM process and you're not doing a thorough job at the risk assessment, it really can leave your organization vulnerable to some risks that you're not aware of. So I'll just see one more second. Any other questions before we wrap up? And I'm going to get back to the slides here in a second. And I think I have my contact information. All this contact information will be sent out to you with the slides as well. And just one more second here to see if anybody else has any follow-up questions. I think not. So with that in mind, I'm going to close the presentation down. I will be making this available in a recorded format in the next couple of days on the ERP seminars and the ERP Risk Advisors website. We're maintaining both of those right now as we're going through the rebranding process. I will send a copy of that link in the email as a follow-up to you all, so you have access to that if you wanted to look at some of the other recorded webinars that were mentioned in today's webinar. So with that, I'm going to close this down. I'm going to leave this slide through for a minute with my contact information. And feel free to email me with any questions or concerns that you have related to the material. And I look forward to hearing from you if you have any follow-up issues. You guys have a great day. Thanks.